Hi, my name is Masochist, and if you just randomly came across this video, I am a thru hiker who has wielded the powers of stubbornness and coffee to somehow walk all the way from Key West, Florida, up to the Canadian border. Along the way, I've been trying to kind of do these little encapsulation videos to help others who might want to do that particular section. This is for the section north of Katahdin, obviously, Appalachian Trail. Bunch of people do it. You can find all sorts of information about that thing. I did something a little different. Once I hit Katahdin, I went over Knife's Edge, down to Roaring Brook, and on to something called the Maine International Appalachian Trail. People seem aware there is an International Appalachian Trail, but at least when I looked, there wasn't a whole ton of information out there about like what was involved. And it was actually a really cool section. So hopefully you're watching this and you're gonna go, ooh, hey, I'm gonna go do that. The International Appalachian Trail is basically something that's still kind of developing, has been for a while, but it's still relatively new. And basically the idea is back in the Pangea days, the Appalachian Mountains, were a thing, and then they split apart, and now there geologically are pieces of it that stretch all the way up into Canada and then even over in Europe, and there's even a section out in Morocco. So it's kind of a cool collection of different geographic areas at this point. Now, unfortunately, if you're like me and you like continuous footpath things, it's not really continuous once you get past Canada. Iceland and Greenland have these like little bits. I think Greenland has like one little bit on the south, one little bit on the west, and they're not that easy to get to or hike. But there is a good continuous section past Katahdin. The main section is 138 miles. It stretches from basically the eastern edge of Baxter Park in the south up to Fort Fairfield, where it crosses the border into New Brunswick. The cool thing is if you're one of those that just loves the whole Appalachian Trail, like shelter culture sort of thing, there are shelters. There are 7 shelters along the main section. And unlike the AT, where you're probably going to be jammed in there with like 20 other people sometimes, I never saw another person at the shelters. All of them I stayed at, I had to myself. Also, all these shelters have privies, and I think everyone I visited ended up having like toilet paper stocked. I mean, they are much better taken care of than the AT, which just gets flooded. In fact, this entire section is relatively lightly traveled by all appearances. I was hiking it from September 6th to September 15th, and I never saw another hiker. I spent about a week hiking it. I ended up taking a 0 in the middle, but about a week of actual hiking days. I probably could have cut that by a day or two. I had a bunch of storms hitting at the first part, so I had a day or two I cut kind of short. In general, it is much easier hiking than you're used to on the AT. There's basically only 2 hills, and a good chunk of it is road walk. You've got about a 45-mile road walk and a 40-mile ATV path, which isn't as nice as trail, but it makes for really good, movement time. And it's not super busy road, so it's nothing like what you have to deal with in Florida and elsewhere. So if you're just looking for the executive summary, it is a really cool section. You get really good views. The views from Deasley Mountain and Mars Hill in particular are just spectacular. The section where you're walking along the Maine-Canadian border is really, really cool. You've got shelters and you see way more animals. I saw 2 moose and a bear like my first day on it. And that's something where, so many people on the AT, they're like, oh, I hope I see a moose, and they don't because they're walking in giant crowds. And again, you don't have crowds. It was a very nice palate cleanser after passing over the top of Katahdin. Also, it made for a really nice exit because one of the things with Katahdin is it's inside Baxter Park. Baxter Park is weird about people actually climbing Katahdin, despite that being the main attraction. So if you do it the way I do it, I basically went from the birches on one side of Katahdin, climbed Katahdin, went over the Knife's Edge down, and I was out of Baxter Park, and I didn't have to deal with like rushing down to get a shuttle, because there were a lot of people that were really having to stress about that. And at mile 0.4, there is a shelter waiting for you right there. So basically you come out there and you can camp. Main downsides, I mean, there is a fairly significant road walk. It's not the worst when it comes to road walks, but you are going to have to do it. That is a work in progress. I've talked to some of the IAT Maine folks, and they would love to have it routed elsewhere, but there's some challenges with the timber companies and things like that. But there is hope that that will be reduced. Also, the shelters aren't quite enough, so if you're trying to like hop shelter to shelter, at least for me, the mileage wasn't correct. So there are some places where you're going to have to stealth camp. However, the stealth camping was fairly good. You know, I was able to find vegetated patches like this. I'm currently stealth camped up in New Brunswick, and this isn't bad at all. Also, you are going to have to deal with a little bit of overgrowth on the trail, but it is surprisingly well marked. The IAT Maine folks seem to put a lot of care into, you know, maintaining the trail up here. So as far as how to do the Maine IAT, this is how I did it. Keep in mind, this is the summer of 2021. We are still in the middle of COVID-19 times. There is the Delta variant outbreak, and that has really affected things. There was an outbreak on the AT near Shaw's, and crossing the border has had extra precautions involved, and a lot of places are kind of still shut down. Some of the hunting camps, like I went into Bolin, they didn't have food because they couldn't find any cooks to hire. You know, there's a major shortage of people to work and lower hours as a result, even where places are open. And this trail does go through some very rural areas of northern Maine, which are currently being hit really, really hard. So as far as starting it, you can actually drive pretty much right to the terminus. That is outside of Baxter State Park. It's on dirt roads, but it's accessible via car. When I was there, I actually ran into a group of day hikers that were there climbing Bernard Mountain. So I started by going up and over Katahdin, and Katahdin is a really cool mountain as long as you don't mind dealing with all the issues around Baxter State Park. I was lucky, since I was coming out of the 100-mile wilderness, I was able to eventually get a spot at the Birches, which is basically at Katahdin Stream Campground right under Katahdin. It's like 5 miles to the summit. If you cannot do that, your options are get a campsite at Katahdin Stream Campground if you can, or else you can do it from Able Bridge. There is a Blueberry Trail connector that just adds another 5 miles. So you basically start there really, really early. You're going to want to be at Katahdin Stream Campground by 7 a.m. when they open to get one of the summit permits, because by about 10 a.m. they cut off new people going up Katahdin, either due to the number of people or worried about people not having time to make it down. I, of course, went over the top of Katahdin because I was coming off of the AT. Now, in order to do that, what I did is I ended up with a slot in the Birches. That is basically 5 miles from the summit of Katahdin. I bought 3 days of food at Able Bridge and carried that. I started super early. I basically started up Katahdin a little bit before dawn. I was on top of Katahdin at 8, and then I crossed over along the Knife's Edge. The Knife's Edge route on Katahdin is one of those things that people tend to blow out of proportion a little bit. You hear people talk about like 3,000 foot drops on either side. It's not that bad. I do have a history of mountaineering, so you know I've had some of that before. If you make it up Katahdin through the normal Able route, you're probably going to be okay. To me, the worst part, other than you're just kind of rock hopping across this ridgeline, was the chimney notch, because there's some third-classy bits going up and down. So that's kind of the crux of the entire thing. And then once you're on the far side, it's just a long, you know, knee-killing descent to get down to Roaring Brook Campground. From there, to connect to the IAT, it's kind of a thing. The rangers, especially on the Katahdin Stream side, will swear up and down that there is no physical way to connect to the start of the IAT. Allegedly, this is because Baxter Park is weird about people doing Katahdin, so they are worried about people coming in from the IAT and climbing it that way, and there being more use. Here's the thing, you can connect. What you do, go to Roaring Brook. From there, you're going to walk down the road and you're going to follow signs to get to Katahdin Lake. You'll then cut off to the right, and there is an abandoned wilderness camp called Katahdin Lake Wilderness Camp. Only quasi-abandoned, people were mowing it when I was there. And from there you can pick up Blue Blazes, and that will take you over to Katahdin Loop Road. Once you get to Katahdin Loop Road, you are going to see your first SIA IAT marker. That's what passes for blazes out on this thing. And you're just walking down a road and you'll see the terminus. It's really understated, and 0.4 miles later you hit your first shelter, and boom, you are on the International Appalachian Trail Maine Edition. The first 30 miles, I was quite frankly in heaven. Yes, it's a little overgrown. Yes, you're on these like old roads, but that was fine. I saw a bear and 2 moose on my first day out there, and it was just such a palate cleanser after all the crowds of the AT. Plus, you get to climb DZ Mountain. DZ Mountain is probably the one picture of the IAT you've seen, if you've seen it, because it's that cool. There's this old fire lookout up there that has this Osborne with this cool map on it, and you have a view over to Katahdin. So when everybody else was getting their summit shots in like a complete fog bank, I had the external picture of the cloud bank over Katahdin. And then I had to run because a thunderstorm hit me. Roughly mile 30 to 45 is the first road walk. It's not that bad. You go by a couple of hunting camps. You're able to get hot food at Matagamon and Shins. I actually got a cabin and took a zero at Shins because it was a nice spot and they had a good restaurant and they had beer on tap. So miles 45 to about 61, you're on an ATV road. I didn't see any ATVs when I was out there, but it's obvious that it's pretty heavily used. There are signs. They're not the signs you need, but you know, there's a gut hooks for this section. So, but you come across park benches and things like that that are kind of nice, and there's water sources all over the place. That dumps you out on the big road walk from about mile 61 to 85, which takes you to Holton, which is where you get on another ATV trail. This is the biggest pain of this entire thing. There is a shelter. It's tucked back behind this farmhouse. Like, I was sitting there staring at my map going, I wonder if this is right. Which is nice. It's a place to stop. Also, there are an Amish hardware store and like fruit stand along the way, and at least one restaurant. So it's not like you're just out there walking on a road with absolutely nothing. I was able to get water filled at those spots, and you are on fairly quiet roads for most of it. Also, the Amish guys are really friendly. I had a number of them come up and want to chat about what I was doing, and they were asking me all sorts of questions like how I keep my phone charged and things like that. And, you know, by the time you're watching this, if it's a year or two after 2021, they may have managed to reroute that back onto ATV roads back in the forest somewhere. Once you finish the road walk at Holton, there's a really nice grocery store and Walmart right there, and then you're on a beautiful ATV trail for a good long while, from about mile 85 to 115 or so. That dumps you at the start of Mars Hill, which is the second of the two mini mountain ranges you have to go over, and it is a hard climb. You're literally climbing up the ski slopes in the grass, but it is just a spectacular view from the top. There are wind turbines up there, and they actually have an IAT shelter right on the top. You have to pack water in, but it's a nice place to stop as long as you don't mind the whir of the blades in the background. And I think you can see Katahdin from up there. I was so excited by Canada. Honestly, I was just looking off to the east to Canada the entire time. And then as you follow the range north, you get good views as you're like waving in and out of all the wind turbines. Mars Hill ends at about mile 123, and then you have a short road walk to access the border stripe. The border stripe is kind of cool. You're literally right there on the Canadian border. Sometimes you're on the Maine side, sometimes, like I was on a Canadian road briefly because the trail kind of meanders back and forth. It isn't like down in Mexico where you've got this wall or security fence or anything. I mean, there's a wheat field at one point blocking your entry into Canada. But it is really cool and scenic because it's got some ups and downs. Trail maintenance back there gets a little bit challenging at times, but you do get cool views as you're, you know, doing the dips and whatnot. I did call the Border Patrol and let them know I was going to be back there, which apparently saved me some hassle. If you just show up, you start tripping sensors and cameras and everything, and then they have to get out to you and they may not be overly happy. You can just call the local Border Patrol station and they didn't even hassle me. The big thing is just don't underestimate this section. Basically, you've got about 10 miles on this border stripe. I was doing it at the end of a 24-mile day. And it started out nice enough. You know, it's this ATV track, and so I just thought it was going to be like that. The next thing you know, I've got a knee-deep stream crossing near the Eaton Border Patrol station. Wasn't that bad. And I'm having to bushwhack a little bit. Wasn't that bad. And then around mile 130, you enter Beaver Bog Hell. I have talked to the IAT Maine folks, and apparently it's not usually as bad as I saw it. There was a ton of rain that came in early September. I got waist deep in that beaver bog having to cross it. There are some markers. You basically, if you're going north, you cut left and you kind of stay out of most of the water walking along the edge of the beaver dam. But the vegetation was so overgrown, I couldn't bushwhack through it. I tried and had to backtrack. And my only option was to get waist deep. So just keep in mind that that's going to slow you down. It's only a couple of tenths of a mile, so it wasn't that bad, and it was giving me like nostalgic flashbacks to the Florida Trail, but it did have me briefly worried that the sun was going to go down on me while I was still in that section. After that, you have a couple of more miles, and then there's another shelter. The last shelter is the Fort Fairfield shelter, and it's basically located right where the road starts, and then you just have a little bit of a overgrown four-wheel drive road that turns into pavement, and then you cut across to the Fort Fairfield Canadian Border Entry Station. And quite frankly, if you're just looking for a high point to end at, you probably want to end there. I crossed into New Brunswick, and it is road walking and ATV trail, and then a whole lot of road walking. It doesn't get really pretty until you're on the northern end of New Brunswick, which is where I'm recording this. Also, there were a good number of hassles crossing over into New Brunswick. Due to COVID, the border had only opened to foot traffic about a month before I got there. Not only did I have to be vaccinated and all of that, not be actively sick, I had to get a negative COVID test within 72 hours. And because Maine is a bit rural up in that area and they were having a major surge of cases, I had to find somebody to take me 40 miles away to get that negative COVID test and then bring me back so I could cross over. As far as resources to do the Maine IAT, it is on Guthooks. It's been there only for a year or two, but that makes it really, really easy. There are waypoints that'll show you where the shelters are and the resupply points, things like that. Just be aware you're not going to get many comments. Not many people have done this, so if you're coming off the AT and you're expecting, water comments, stealth camping comments, there aren't a lot of them. I've left as many as I could along the way. Also, the Maine chapter of the International Appalachian Trail is super helpful, and I would strongly recommend reaching out to them to say hi, if nothing else. I didn't. I just was expecting to hike through. I had gut hooks. What else do I need? I had my resupply plan. But I ran into one of their guys just randomly on the trail near Mattagamon, and that actually really worked out for me because when plans changed on the northern end and I needed help getting a COVID test, they were there. Bill Duffy in particular, he's the one that is doing the Guthooks app, so he can provide extra information if you have any questions along the way. Resupply wise, it's pretty easy to do. I carried 3 days of food from Able Bridge up and over Katahdin, and that got me until about mile 45 at Shins Pond because it's pretty easy hiking. Mattagamon at mile 30 is another one of those hunting camps, and they also have a light resupply. Mattagamon also had isobutane, so that was the one thing that I was a little bit nervous about because you never know if you can get those canisters. Holton around mile 85 has a full-on grocery store and a Walmart, so you can get pretty much anything you need, and that was my big resupply to carry me on. I did pass an IGA at Mars Hill where I went in to get a sandwich, so you can get more stuff there if you don't want to carry. But at that point, you're only a day or two away from, Fort Fairfield. Just keep in mind, Fort Fairfield is a couple of miles off trail, so if you're going into New Brunswick, you're probably not going to want to resupply there. The first day in New Brunswick, you're going to hit Perth Andover, and there are some options on that side. Now, if you are continuing into New Brunswick and you have plans of continuing on, since I'm on the Eastern Continental Trail, I was going to go through Quebec and end at Cap Gaspé. Now, turns out there are all sorts of hunting closures and caribou mating closures, and Quebec gets really complicated. So basically, plan to be out of Quebec and done by September 26th. Otherwise, you're going to end up like me and have to either skip sections or just skip. There are other sections. You can go from Matapedia to Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia if you want to continue hiking, and there's a good number, like 400 miles through there. And Newfoundland is north of there with another 400 miles if you want to get wild and you haven't run into winter. So basically, the Maine IAT does have its drawbacks, road walks, ATV, but I'm very glad I did it, and I did end up enjoying it a lot more than the next section north up in New Brunswick. In particular, Deasy Mountain and Mars Hill really made an impression, and also the border stripe was really cool to walk. Even if you don't want to do the entire thing, if you are on the AT and you're thinking of continuing, you can do the up and over Katahdin like I did, come down, stay at the shelter, and do the first 30 miles. It'll be spectacular. You will have another great view of Katahdin, and then you can end up getting a campsite at Mattagamon. That's basically a few miles into the first road walk, and get picked up there, and it is way less hassle than having to screw around with having to get a shuttle or somebody waiting in line to get you out of Baxter Park.